all film fanatics and culture lovers, it's showtime. Cultures and Communities Fest is coming soon, both virtually and in person, to a movie palace near you. CCF features a full week of candid conversations, moving pictures, and unforgettable events, all focused on holistic health and social wellness. Come celebrate culture with your community this September 6th through the 12th. Go to mkefilm.org/CCF for more information.
Good evening, everyone. I am Tiana Clayton Mallett, Community Outreach Coordinator for Milwaukee Film. Welcome to Milwaukee Film's 2021 Cultures and Communities Film Festival. You are joining us tonight for a discussion about sex education. Shame and guilt surrounding the topic of sex are deeply embedded within our culture, in addition to inaccurate and misinformation. We are here to talk about the impact that shame, guilt, and misinformation about the topic of sex has on youth. This is a very candid and free-flowing conversation, so viewer discretion is advised. From September 6th through the 12th, the Cultures and Communities program presents its annual film festival focused on the health and wellness of marginalized communities. In addition to this virtual event, we are also officially outside, y'all. We have a wonderful schedule of in-person film screenings and conversations. You can check out the full film screening and event schedule at mkefilm.org/CCF. Thank you to Freighter and the Medical College of Wisconsin for sponsoring this year's Cultures and Communities Festival. During this conversation tonight, don't forget to engage the chat with your questions and comments. Dr. Lachey Harvey, our moderator this evening, is a professor, seamstress, collage artist, and interim associate dean of student learning and research creation in the graduate studies at the Maryland Institute College of Art. Dr. Lachey Harvey holds a PhD in human sexuality studies and a master's degree in education. She has taught and trained on sexuality education for over 20 years and has been inside the college classroom for almost 10 years, where she has received teaching awards and fellowships. Dr. Harvey is joined by the director of the film A Sexplanation, Alex Liu, along with Mia Noel, Lynetta Alexander Islam, Kanoe Montano, and Tristan Gross. I welcome Dr. Lachey Harvey and our guests. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiana. Great day. Good evening to everyone. Hope those of you who are watching in and tuning in to us have had an amazing holiday weekend. You got you some restoration, maybe even had you some sex. Education, that is, because that's what we're here to talk about. So, as we are welcoming in and discussing a film, Alex, that you put together, what I'd love you to do is maybe for those who are watching us but haven't had an opportunity to see the film, tell us what would make you decide to create a documentary to talk about sex education of all things.
Yeah, so I'll try to make this short. I tend to talk a lot when it comes to why I made the film, but it definitely just stems from my deep kind of sadness and anger, kind of white hot rage over our sexual culture and the, in my mind, unnecessary suffering that results. I was lucky, and when I came out of the closet at 17, I had amazing parents who immediately, found me therapy, found gay people in the community to make sure I understood that it wasn't, the end of my life. Most people, though, my generation aren't as lucky. And when we started to do more research, it became really clear that our sex education system was really failing a lot of kids in so many different ways, not just gay kids, but everyone really. That when we don't really have sex education in our schools, we have more anti-pregnancy, anti-disease education, maybe education around consent, but really more fear-mongering around assault. And not real true comprehensive sex education. And this education has been around, for decades, but school boards really can't get it put into place because it's just really difficult for a school board member to say, we need to be talking about masturbation, we need to be talking about anal sex, we need to be talking about, no school board member is willing to really risk their political career for that reason. And so I have a background in science, I have a background in science journalism specifically. And I was already just so interested in this. And, over the years, I kept asking, why aren't people doing this? Why aren't people doing this? Why aren't people teaching this? And then finally, it was like, well, you have the interest, you have the background. Why don't you try to do something about it? So I kind of just went to as many sex educators, researchers, scientists, anyone who was willing to talk candidly about sex and to answer a lot of my still very deep-seated shames and anxieties around sex. And the result was the documentary where I travel around the U.S. and Canada trying to figure out some answers. Oh.
That was a great explanation.
Thank you. Hopefully she comes back.
I can go next. We know our order
Yeah.
while we're waiting for her to come back. But my name is Kanoe Montano, and I'm based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But I actually work. Oh, okay, awesome. But I actually work at Carroll University in Waukesha, Wisconsin, and I work predominantly in violence prevention and education here. So I'm working with a group of students that are 18 to 25 years old, and we're really trying to talk with them about how can we support survivors, how can we prevent violence from happening. And a fundamental piece of that conversation is sex education, and how we were all socialized to learn about sex often puts us at a disadvantage right from jump. So usually my conversations with survivors, with educating people, always land back on like, but how did we even begin with these ideas that perpetuate a culture of violence in the first place? And that usually comes from a lack of comprehensive sexual education.
All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Tristan Gross. I'm also based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My intro into community work was through sex education. I was recruited by Denise Crumble in Milwaukee. She worked for the city at the time and was leading an initiative called Plain Talk. And what we were essentially doing was talking to parents about how to have this conversation about sex with their children, right? And I think that for me really hit something, because you had these individuals who had children, and some of them had grandchildren, but they had never even really dove into the idea of what they were taught about sex and what that had meant for them throughout their for them in their life. And so from there, I went on to do some consulting work, talk around, kind of African American affairs, and issues around men and boys, and the idea around or the connection between toxic masculinity and male socialization and sex is huge, right? The way that men and boys are taught to think about, value, and engage with sex is really, not only is it unhealthful, but it's extremely predatory, very, very often. And then I think on a deeper level, it's one of the ways that we are, as men and boys, kind of pulled away from our humanity, because of the way that we are taught to engage with this idea of sex. And then I began to work with men who are on probation for domestic violence, and now I'm on the victim services side for intimate partner violence. And I mean that sex is an integral part of that conversation, because anytime there is violence in a relationship, there can be no consensual sex, right? Because where there is fear, there can be no consent. And the most recent, I have a daughter of my own, right? And for me, it has been so important for me to kind of practice what I've been preaching all of these years, and to make sure that she understands the anatomically correct names, that she understands the concepts around sex, but even stepping back away from that, right? Making sure that she has autonomy over her body, making sure and that she knows and understands that, but then to making sure that she has the communication skills to navigate all conversations, and then hopefully when she decides to excuse me, when she decides to engage, she feels safe and comfortable and prepared for whatever comes.
Hi, I'm Lynetta Alexander Islam. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am in Milwaukee, and I am an educator, playwright, author. After about 15 years or so, working as an educator, school leader in Black density schools in the city, I quit. for other reasons, and I am currently the pre-K through 20 education strategist for Ubuntu Research and Evaluation. And so I just want to add maybe possibly why I'm here, as an educator, as a mom, and also as one who has experienced childhood sexual trauma. It's very important for me and has been very important for me to teach children to have agency, to build their voice, to know their body, to know their boundaries, and find various ways to express themselves, to advocate for themselves. So, a lot of my work was in, and still is, every chance I get the opportunity. In my current work, we don't get to talk about sex education as much, but trust, I'll be trying to figure out how to work that in there. But it's very important to give the children the shared language, the appropriate language, and at the end of the day, to know that they are worthy and they're valued, so that when certain differences or certain challenges come up, and also to build those relationships, so when those challenges or different things come up, or ideas or fears or questions, then they have this community around them to go to that can talk them through and work or help them process and navigate through all of these things that come up as young people and as people in general.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mia Noel. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also based in Milwaukee. And I was a sex educator for, I think, about 12 years, working from pre K all the way through college. And then I also, with a group of friends, co founded a program called Sex Ed for Adults, which was bar based sexual education. Tristan, if I remember correctly, you were on one of our panels on masculinity, which is really amazing. So we would meet in a bar about once a month and have a discussion on a different sex ed topic. And for me, that was one of the things that I'm most proud of, because I think that as adults, there's sometimes some shame and some stigma around not knowing certain things, like despite all of the varied and possibly terrible sex education you may have received, somehow at 18 you're just like supposed to know it all, right, and have no questions. And a lot of times when I would tell people about sex ed for adults, they'd be like, don't adults know everything? I'm like, probably not. Like, I have questions. Right, other people probably have I have questions, and this is my job. Like, obviously people might have questions. And then to have like a safe, non-judgmental space that was like kind of relaxed, right, where you can talk about all the various things. And there's a lot of things that we don't cover. Even if sex ed was comprehensive, there's a lot of things that we don't cover. So some of the programs that I was like very, very proud of is talking about masculinity, talking about experiences around miscarriage, talking about experiences around kink, and making your own kind of sex toys and bondage and things like that, right? We had a porn star come in and talk about how they create ethical porn, right? So these like kinds of conversations that I think, like, even if we had stellar like World Health Organization approved sex ed, it probably still wouldn't cover, because there's just so many things, right? There's so many aspects. Sex and sexuality are such a integral part of our entire lives, right? So that's one of the programs that I think I was most proud of, and I'm very excited to be here today.
Yeah. Thank y'all for welcoming me back. I got lifted out by the tech gods of some sort. I duked them out, but here I am. So all is well. Mia, you actually, as you were sharing, something came up that Alex came up in the movie a lot, which is actually how you close the film, and we'll work backwards, and that is, so what are we to do about the fact that sex is scary and pleasurable and full of mixed messages and different across culture and time and gender and all of these things? And virtually everyone that you talked to, Alex, said comprehensive sex education. And Mia just said, how can you really have comprehensive sex education when there's so many things to talk about? And I am curious, if you all imagined comprehensive sex education, what are the elements that it would have that maybe aren't what we understand when we talk about mainstream comprehensive sex education, which usually involves talking about sexually transmitted infections and different types of ways of partnering, and comprehensive sex education moves like that. But as you all think about your own experiences with sex education, what are some elements that you think should exist that probably don't?
I think of framing, that really at its core, I think good sex really is good connection, right? And good connection is good communication. And communication can be a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be actual verbal, it can be physical. There's a lot of forms of communication. And just like any good marriage, just like any good relationship, building the skills for communication. Number one, being a good listener. I think it's really hard. I think I find myself talking a lot. And throughout this process of making the film, I realized if I want people to listen to me non-judgmentally, I need to develop the skills to do that. And it's really hard to listen non-judgmentally. You're going to have your reactions. You're going to have your biases. You'll never leave you. But to recognize them sooner, and we kind of talk about this in the film, but to recognize your disgust reactions and not to change them, but to recognize them and really analyze why are they there. Think critically about the reactions you have, and make sure that what you're putting out when it comes to sex, if you can really nail that skill, I think you'll be surprised how much of a space it opens for so many people to find the courage to talk about sex. Because I think like you said, you can't cover everything in a lifetime about sex, but you can at least get better at or know that the key component to a healthy sex life is the freedom to communicate, to feel like you can actually not only say what you feel or desire in a moment, but actually be heard as well. So as much as we can focus about developing, there's a lot of different aspects of sex education, but the one aspect that I think maybe is not emphasized as much is really that communication skill set.
Yeah, that's definitely heard, Alex. Others, anyone else? What would be some elements that would be present in your comprehensive sex education if you were to create one?
I can go. Sure. The ways that I was talking about, like, kind of like a who approved comprehensive sex ed, I feel like is like the floor, right?
Okay.
And so the ceiling is like all these other things that we can include. And Alex is absolutely right. There's probably no amount of time that we could dedicate to include all the elements. That would be so great. So I think one of the ways that we can do the best for young people, especially, is to give them like the best resources to allow them to like figure out like, okay, this is where I can go for more information. Because in addition to the fact that there's just so much information out there, it changes, right? So something that's approved and safe might not be the best option 10 years from now, right? So knowing that like you have spaces to go where you can find good information, accurate information, that you can trust yourself to make some decisions about what is best for you, right? So like having that, like, I can tell you my opinions. I'm not going to, but I could tell you my opinions.
Come on,
right?
Mia.
But that's not important, right? What works for Mia isn't what works for Tristan, isn't what works for Kanoe, right? So, in developing like those more skills, right? So that like, despite like the fact that there's kind of ever-changing things, like people still have ways to navigate that.
Yeah, some literacies about how to have this communication that Alex is talking about, right? How to actually do that work. Tristan, I see you coming in with us. Come on in.
Yeah, so the way that my mind works is, right, like that everything happens within a context, right? Like there's so much around us. And so, we often address problems by saying like, what can we do that's really specific to this problem to solve the problem? So the immediate response, like this immediate ideas that popped up in my head was first as a society, we need to normalize having conversations about sex. We need to remove the very public stigma that comes out of like the Christian foundations, right, of our country and that have formed our society. Because like there will always be resistance to creating this comprehensive thing if it's not, if the society isn't receptive to it.
I see.
And then right, in that way, if we're normalizing the conversation, if we're talking about sex in the same way that we talk about other things, right? Like, it's not just that I'm getting this information from a comprehensive conversation, but in the same way we're talking about, money management with a young person, right? You're also having conversations about sex. The other one is by dismantling systems of oppression, right? Because again, right, how can we have very clear, comprehensive resources if we are still like dehumanizing and marginalizing entire groups of people, and not looking at the way we connect sex to manhood, or sex within women, or the way we talk about sex within the binary, right? Like, or the way that we kind of shame sex for folks who might identify outside the binary. And so, like, for me, I'm like, we got to create a fertile, right, some fertile ground before we even plant those seeds of start saying like, okay, now what do we actually need to discuss, and be able to have a full-on conversation. And then I definitely echo, Alex and Mia there, is just that there has to be a thing. And then, right, age appropriate information. Developmentally, how are we making sure that young people are being introduced to ideas, concepts, and language, again, to help normalize these conversations, and allow them to be able to grow in who they are as a person, and then who they are as a sexual being.
Absolutely. I'm thinking, please, Lynetta, please come on, slide on in here with us, please.
Thank you. I think so. My opinion is just the acknowledgement and awareness that we are all sexual beings. And as a parent, I have to admit that that's really scary. But I think it opens the door to conversations and understanding that we're all sexual beings. That any effort to control it or minimize it or put it in a box is oppressive. And so just being able to understand that in a way that we don't want, comprehensive sex education is happening, because what's not being taught in the class is happening in the hallways and in notes and on social media. As a parent of a 13-year-old, when WAP dropped,
come on in here, Lynetta.
Decision. I had to make a decision. Do I steer my daughter in the direction of looking at sex and herself as a sexual being in a positive manner or a liberating manner, and as a woman, as a Black woman, or do I push her down in this box and say no, we can't talk about it? And the moment she was like, "Mom, did you see a video?" Like in the split second, to make that decision. And so conversations were able to happen because of that, and understanding that we're going to stumble across these things. I saw a porno when I was 5. Like, that was my first time seeing it was just on the TV, and I watched it, and I critically analyzed and compared it to the other versions of Cinderella. But I want to go back to something that was said in Alex's film, which was fantastic, by the way. The idea that when folks are engaging in a conversation, that's sex. And I thought that was amazing, because I know for me, oftentimes when I need a certain type of intimacy, I'm not, there's no shade to my husband, but I'm not going to my husband, I'm going to my girls. And what I get out of that conversation, or those conversations, is just as affirming, just as positive, and it's exactly what I need. Is the release that I need, it's the energy that I need, and that comes about from being in those empowering women circles, and just the idea that it can show up in any form. And then, but when we try to determine what it is for religious reasons or fear or whatever it is, that we're more than likely oppressing someone's means of expression.
Yeah, thank you for that, Lynetta. Indeed. Kanoe, you don't have to, but I want to open the space in case you want to come right on into that dialogue about what elements would be present in a comprehensive sex education in your land, you know?
I think what really resonated with me are parts of what Tristan and what Lynetta are saying about how there are these fundamental pieces of talking about sex that we usually leave out of the conversation, which ends up going into like parents' wide eyes, like red zone territory of sexualizing your children, when it really starts off as talking about permission. What does permission look like? What does bullying look like? When does bullying cross over into they're crossing my boundaries? I'm learning about unhealthy communication, unhealthy coping skills, all of those things. And then trust. If your child does not trust you with certain levels of information, they're not going to disclose their curiosities in a lot of ways. And so I think that those fundamental pieces of communication, connection, boundaries, trust is where sex as a conversation and as an educational moment, an ongoing moment, has its roots, and that we often ignore those pieces as being the fundamental pieces of anything. So we use food metaphors a lot because I work on a college campus. That's usually what clicks with folks, is using food metaphors. So if you're trying to make a good pizza, you need to start off with great ingredients. And these are all ingredients to a wonderful conversation around sex. And that conversation around sex is the metaphorical pizza. So I think
we'll never think about pizza the same, Kanoe. Thanks.
Of
Never.
course not. Right.
It will always be connected with sex now because of this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they say in the film that everything is sex, so it's fine.
Well, actually, that's exactly where I wanted to go, and I want to thank you, Lynetta, and I want to thank you, Kanoe, for bringing that to the space. Because Alex, I got to tell you, I mean, besides the fact that I think your parents are hilarious, okay? I love your parents.
I'm lucky they're willing to sit down with me, yes.
I want you to let them know that this brown girl, okay, from the South, but living in the North, loves you. But what I will say, so in many ways, they were very surprising to me, the last conversation you had with them. But more than that was the conversation that you had with the priest. And I saw your own face become surprised and part of the conversation. While I agree with everything that the priest said, I actually would just trade out the way he said that everything is sexual. I actually think everything is sensual, right? I often use the language sex and sexual to really refer to the act or the acts, right? And so a slow wine is sexual, right? And yet this conversation that we're having right now is sensual. Everything Lynetta said, my dear sister friends and I, we often talk about, we're so grateful for our lovers, right? Husbands, love, whoever our lover is. Oh, but when you can get with your homegirls and just like, blah, there's no shade to the lover, but it's like, you couldn't have given me that because you don't remember me when I was relaxed with acrylic nails. They do. And that level of intimacy, that level of ability to recall each other's disposition at a particular time and how it's changed, that is sensual. And so I want us to kind of talk about, in some ways, the parallels, the intersections, the divergence when we start talking about the sensual, the sexual, and religion. Because that is the place where we seemingly lose people. And I make the argument that I don't think that we should. I think being in communion with a higher power is also sensual, right? It's also creative and productive in a particular sort of way. And so in some ways, whoever wants to come into that part and what they saw in that part, please. And Alex, if you want to, allow folks to talk about it and you come in and share how you did talk about your surprise, but really what that meant for you to have that piece expressed in the film. I'd love to hear, but I'm interested how other folks feel and move when we talk about the sensual and the religious and or the spiritual. We could probably parse those words out too, but it exists, and it was a major part of the film, right, Alex? Because it's actually what your mother and your grandmother say is a reason why they said we're not going to really have a conversation with him, because modesty, because a Catholic girl is not going to have these conversations. So there's a question in there somewhere, but y'all touch it where you want to.
I think it's, I'm still kind of grappling with my life after that conversation. I feel like I had that conversation about 5 years ago. I feel like I'm about a 5-year-old spiritually at the moment. I think I did cut myself off from the spiritual side of sex for the reasons my mom mentioned. That it's you don't talk about it. the messages I got from the spiritual kind of leaders in my life were very negative and shaming. And so, kind of as a middle finger, I just cut it off, right? And I ignored that part of sex and sexuality, which to my detriment, because I think, at its best, sex is a spiritual union. It is, to me, I'm still grappling with the language, but it is like one of the purest forms of trust, vulnerability, a lot of the words that have been used today. And if you can really let go of yourself and actually uh, join with someone in that way, whether it's intercourse and penetration or not, however you define it. I mean, there's just no better, no more human kind of type of interaction. And so yeah, I think I'm still figuring that out. I'm realizing it's sad to me, if religious leaders saw sex in that way and was able to harness the power of human connection and love and spirituality and sexuality. Because I think I'm hungry for that kind of spiritual moral leadership when it comes to this arena, and it seems to be so sorely lacking. So I don't know if this is a great answer, but yes, I'm grappling with that now about how much of myself have I cut off and deadened, and how many people have I not allowed myself to actually connect with for a lot of these fears on a level that is more profound than, say, just getting off or having an orgasm or just pure pleasure. Yeah, this is something that I'm struggling with at the moment.
Yeah. Kanoe, I know you're going to come in here. I want to say to the part that you're saying, Alex, um, I do think that some of our spiritual leaders are clear that that's the connection and that's why they step away from it, because you can find anything you're looking for in the
True,
church.
very true.
And I will say the last church I joined many years ago, I have since moved away from the church in a organized space, but I very much respect what they do. It's because the pastor used the word penis in the pulpit. I said, where do I sign up for this? Because y'all gonna be having conversations here that I want to be a part of. And that the fact that we think that is oxymoronic is actually the oddity to me, as opposed to saying, what better place
Yeah.
to have that conversation to begin to talk about the parallels. So I just wanted to drop that in there. And if the pastor is listening, he knows who he is, praise God. And that's space. Kanoe, I think you were going to come into that conversation about religion and that maybe even that part of the film that we saw.
Yeah, I think, first of all, it was really healing to my inner child to watch that conversation with a religious leader, to be able to be like, oh, wow, there's somebody who has space for this. Like, that just spoke to me in a really profound way. But I think that religious institutions and spirituality kind of need to be separated a little bit here for me to explain my point, in that I think that religious institutions were very hyper aware of how much humanity they were denying people, and then they weaponized it and perverted it in a way that like fit their agenda. And so I think people within those institutions and who are subscribed to different sects of spirituality have every reason to be just as frustrated as the people who broke out of that. And I think that denying humanity and ascribing downtrodden morality and stuff like that to the people who are hypersexual all fits in within a larger agenda that institutions built, not that spirituality is inherently a part of. So I just think that was an interesting conversation, is to be able to look back and be like, wow, they created systemic others to fit their agenda and denied humanity on both ends of that spectrum.
Yeah, Kanoe, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Lynetta, thoughts on that?
Yeah, Kanoe, there's a very clear distinction between and spirituality, and that's where that then religion control experience probably. Let me bring my Sunday school teacher up. I didn't put that in myself, but former days as a
right.
I always thought it was interesting look at like the study of or the history and the use of words and how they were used in the Bible or how they were used originally. And I'm just speaking from the Bible. That when it says that a man knew his wife, that's intimate with her, that they sex. And that know is also used when it's talking about know God or God. So it's the same know. So there's that sense of intimacy
Mm-hmm.
relationships, right? Absolutely right. In a religious context, that over a lot. But when you think about that spiritual exchange, a lot of the times the language that we use to describe those spiritual epiphanies, much like
Oh, Lynetta, we might be losing you just a smidge.
It sounded like it was gonna be good.
It was. I know it was.
It was good.
It was already good, as the church would
That's
say.
true.
It's
It was already good.
Well, hopefully when Lynetta comes back in, we'll just allow her to pick right back up in that space. I kind of want to stay here in this space of the sensual, the spiritual, the religious, and how we understand sex education. Because what I do find to be fascinating, and you didn't necessarily say this in the film, Alex, but you said it. It doesn't matter if you're a part of a spiritual house or organized religion. We all seem to be able to understand that they are connected, right? That those who follow Islam, there are parameters around sex. Those who are Christians, there are parameters around sex. Those who are Buddhist or Hindu or something, there seemingly is a parameter, and yet the moments where we have to divorce ourselves from it, almost to get a cleaner understanding of sex, I think is a phenomenon that's worthy of conversation, because that often is when folks will say, man, I left because they talking crazy, they're hypocrites, they're this, that, and the third. And yet then the self goes out and finds their own knowledge and can come back to the church a little bit stronger, right? Which in many ways I think is the underlying message of your film, Alex, is how can folks go through these highs and lows and then ultimately still be able to stand tall in whatever it is their belief system is around sex and sexuality, right? And so I'm grateful for that. Lynetta, the church house welcomes you back. And we knew that and the word that you said in the Bible, we know, okay, intimately, that what you were saying was going to be good. So pick it up wherever you want to.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure where I failed the connection, but I was simply making the point that the in a sexual way is the same way that's used to express God knowing us.
Yes. Which is a powerful thing. I will say this, Alex, and I'm going to be transparent. And Alex, I want you to hold your thought. I would like some other folks to engage. I want to give you the last right in this part of the conversation. I will say that the part that challenged me the most in the film was a discussion around porn and pornography, for various reasons, and I'll share those shortly. It's not about my thought about it, but I am curious for those who watch the film, or even our understanding about where do we understand the line to be with pornography. And by line, I mean, you talk, Tristan, you're a parent. Lynetta, you're a parent. Mia, you've talked about what even adults don't know, right? The fact that you can leave childhood, adolescenthood, and make it to adulthood and not know a thing. Sometimes porn is the answer even for adults in that way, right? So I'm curious, and Kanoa, you may have, I'm sure you have, and a way of thinking about pornography. And yet the conversation is usually about, is it good or is it bad? And I think my question is there a more sophisticated way of having a conversation about pornography in a conversation about sex education? And I'm curious if any of you all have had what you would call sophisticated conversations around pornography, its use, its consumption, and the like, and if you'd be willing to share those.
I can jump in here. I think my initial response to that was I was just really taken aback, right? Like, because fundamentally, it's like, because knowing what I know about the porn industry and the predatory nature of the porn industry and the commodification, like how we commodify the bodies of people's bodies, that at some level that sits really deeply with me, right? Like, and I can't, and I understand, and I know people who have a healthy relationship, right, with porn, and as you mentioned in the film, Alex, for some couples, like it really adds another dynamic to their relationship. And for some individuals, it's a space of exploration. But I think one of the things that so many of the folks said was like in that conversation was that you have to have the solid foundation so that you can engage with the content in an appropriate way. But what we just understand is that so many people don't have that foundation, right? And so, when I think about porn, I think about a tool, right? Like if I put a hammer in the hand of a very skilled carpenter, he can make some things happen. He can make some magic happen.
Magic.
If I put a hammer in the hand in someone else's hands that may not be as skilled, who may have malice intent, who may not fully understand harm and all of those things, that could be very, 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 very dangerous, right? And I think, and so for me, that's kind of how I think about, porn. And then in talking to so many men, right? Like porn was their sex ed, right? Porn was where they learned about sex, and in the way that porn is shot, right? Like it is about penetration. It is about male pleasure. It is about the subjecting women, and without any self-reflection to be able to like move through those things. Men, like so many of the messages that men got about sex and women from porn are so harmful. They're so harmful. And even what it means for their interactions with folks, right? Like the categories, right? If, how does watching nurse porn impact my interaction with my nurse when I go to the doctor? Right? Like, and what does that mean? Because for so many men that I've talked to, this idea of like, ooh, I saw this in a porn once, can I act this out? Has mean that they have created unsafe spaces for people all over the place. They're going around doing all sorts of harm, trying to act out what they saw in porn. And so, again, while I'm like, yes, this thing can be a tool, the way that I've seen the majority of folks engage with it has been harmful. And I don't know what to do with that. Like,
Understood.
Yeah.
Well, and I know others. I saw you shaking your head yes to the affirmative to something that the kind of an earlier part that Tristan was talking about, the tool. And so I'd love to have you come in, all of you all come into that space, and Alex, you'll come there too. What I will drop here, like just sprinkle a little paprika on the deviled egg for a second, is that I was actually very impressed, Alex, when you met with the gentleman from Pornhub. I was like, wow. Let's talk to the data scientists. That's a great place to add to this here documentary, because there's a lot of data. There's so much data being collected from the numerous porn sites that we have, and what could be done with that, right? Good, bad, or indifferent. I don't mean to use those qualifiers, but yet I wanted to give you a little dollop there, Alex, that I definitely enjoy. That ability to think about it from a data perspective. But Mia, I'm inviting you to the carpet. You may not have anything specifically to say to Tristan's piece, but I saw you engaging some of the thoughts that he was saying about the lines where we understand porn and its consumption.
Yeah, I think that a lot of folks who are advocating for like more comprehensive sex ed also advocate for porn literacy, right? So helping young people or people in general understand what they're watching. And I think there was a part in the film, I mean, I loved the Pornhub. I've been getting the Pornhub insights for years. I subscribe. I love it.
Right now.
So they offer like a wide, just like it's just fascinating information, right?
It's fascinating.
It's one of the most accessed websites in the world, right? Of billions of websites across the planet, like this website is like one of the most accessed. So the amount of information they have accessible is immense. And then you have the fact that like what they're really saying is like basically almost everybody watches porn. So I think that the levels of conversation aren't necessarily like get rid of porn, right? Because I think that we're past that stage, in my opinion. Right? It's help people understand what they're watching. right? Which is that they're watching fantasies, and fantasies have a place, right? And helping people understand what they're watching. I talk to a lot of young people, they have all watched porn, right? And so like helping them parse out information about what that says about people's bodies, right? And how they should look, how they should engage, what that says about like the ways that people interact. I know that earlier I was talking about how we had a porn star do a session for sex ed for adults. So they came in and they talked about what it is to make what they consider ethical porn, and that is porn that generally people have to pay for. So it's an interesting thing, right? Because
Now you gotta
like
we gotta bring the money into the
right,
conversation.
be ethical, the people who are participating should be paid, right? And they talk about consent and they show consent in their porn, and they show lube, right? That's a thing that isn't often shown in porn. Or they show people navigating barriers, and they show people laughing, which is one of the things that I really, really appreciate, right? So I think that there are like so many different dimensions, and the film does a good job of talking about some of those aspects, right? Of like what's missing from pornography that might be present in sex and like the relationships that people might have, right? And then I think Tristan did a really amazing job of talking about like the necessity for having the skills and tools to like look at what you're viewing and think about it in those ways of like, this is a fantasy, this is not something that I might necessarily be able to act out, right? But I get to like enjoy the viewing of it and for what that adds to my sex life. So those are some of my thoughts.
Understood. Yeah, understood. Others, Lynetta, Kanoe, any conversation about that porn space? You don't have to live there, but there's room for you to if you want to. Yeah. Okay.
I just agree with everything that Mia just said. I think anything, if one thing is your sole source of information, I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
And I think there's so many opportunities to find other information or to have conversations.
Which, Alex, I said I'd give you the last right to the porn part of the conversation. So
I will say I now do pay for all of my porn. I in the last 5 years after this move, it's become a strongly held principle of mine.
Your movie
that
turned
I
you
should never
out
watch
in
free
terms
porn.
of
Yeah.
your own practice.
But yeah, I think, the way I think about porn, I mean, that was the longest part of this section of the movie, the most difficult to put together because
Really?
it is so complicated and so complex. But I knew I had to put it in there because
Yeah.
that was my sex education. It was the first time I'd ever seen two men have sex, and it wasn't shamed. It was it looked pleasurable, right? It gave me some sense of community that my desires were validated, right? So I come to porn from that place, right? But I think the porn I did watch, when I started actually having sex, you soon realize like this is nothing like what you see in porn, right? That I was not focused on my pleasure. I was focused on my performance. I was focused on a lot of things that ultimately took me decades of pain and suffering to kind of uneducate myself around, right? So and one thing I think about a lot now is just like because I do watch a lot of American porn, I rarely ever watch Asian men in American porn, right? And when I do, it's very specific about their kind of role. So I think a lot about like, oh man, how much of this really early sexual education I got has really distorted how I see things. But I kind of think about porn maybe just being like 50 years behind most media we watch, right? I think of it more around the lines of media literacy, right? Like if you put out a Snow White today, you couldn't do it, right? Because it's just so obviously filled with horrible tropes that we don't want to perpetuate, right? And porn really hasn't had that kind of reckoning yet. Mainly because no one wants to talk about the fact that they're all watching porn, right? Think about romantic comedies too, right? Like 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the romantic comedies of the past, I think put a lot of damaging ideas into both men and women's heads, right? And I think the porn is doing the exact same thing. And hopefully we can, by starting talking about it and all just being comfortable, okay, we all watch porn, right? Let's talk about how it's good, how it's bad, and it's just starting a conversation around Much like what everyone is saying here, the fact that, we can watch, kids know very innately that you don't drive like Fast and the Furious, you don't solve crime like superhero movies, because they see tons of people around them not driving that way or not acting that way, but they never see different bodies. They never see other people, how they make love. They don't hear their adults in their life talk about what sex means to them and how it actually helps them in life, right? So if all you're getting your information from is porn, then I think it is very damaging, even though it is very erotic or pleasurable, whatever it is. So I think, there have been drawings of naked people on caves for, tens of thousands of years, right? We're never going to get rid of this impulse of ours to want to see naked people going at it. So I think it's incumbent on ourselves to really think about porn, not as like this separate idea of like, it's part of the media, it's part of our culture, it's part of who we are as human beings, and we need to confront it head on and with that same kind of mindset.
Yeah. Well, I know we have now come to the end of our time where we would otherwise take in some questions from those who may be watching us, or keep on chatting. What I will say, thank you all for sharing much of yourselves and your ideas around sex education, your experiences with it. What I will say, I have many things that I could say. I agree with everyone, Alex. There just was a lot of information that I walked away being like, oh, I want to talk about this for a long time. I'm very grateful that your parents said in the very beginning of the film that sex was the least of their concern. Right? And because I was very clear that you had this white rage from the beginning, and yet your parents were like, we don't have that. We just didn't have it. And I often think about the role of parenting in the conversation around sex education, because it can be so polarized, right? That you have a scene of a woman seemingly in Congress saying, this should be left to the family. This shouldn't be in the schoolhouse. Those of us who have been in education and studied education could understand why someone would say that, because the schoolhouse hasn't always been good to Black children, Mexican children, Puerto Rican children, any other child of color, right? In terms of the things, the ideas that they are sharing or helping these children understand that they're supposed to be. So in one breath, we can understand that. And in the next breath, though, I always am of the belief that parents are so focused on like building character and making sure that the children don't have snot on their nose, okay, and that their shoes fit, that before you know it, they look up and their child is 13. And you're like, oh, it might have been too late. And so I'm very grateful that your parents were, one, vulnerable enough to say that just wasn't on our mind. And then you gave us an out, right, with great conversations. And the two of them who are working with those young people who are working with parents and children, because more than anything in my own career with sex education, it has seemingly been that the parents look up and they feel like it's too late. There's no way I can make a change. There's no way I can make any sort of change about this. I just have to put the container on them. And yet your film really shows us that we always get an opportunity to like cleanse the palate, level set, try this thing again. And so again, I say I'm grateful for your parents. They were fun. And I also want to say, if you do a documentary with your mother, just call us, because I want to sit and talk with her, because the questions you asked her, I was like, great follow-up question, Alex. She did a wonderful job in that space. So I'd love to maybe even ask, are there any, let me check and see if there are any questions in the chat or anything that we should be looking at coming our way, either for Alex or for those of us on the panel. I don't see any, but that doesn't mean they won't come in shortly. So if we may, as we then get ready to close out the night in this conversation of the film Sexplanations on sex education with some amazing panelists who've been doing phenomenal work within themselves and in the field, I would love to close with a question that may require you all to ponder a little bit, and that is, what is it that you now know as an adult about sex and sex education that you didn't know when you were 7, 12, 15, 32. I don't know who's 32, but for those, what are some of those? What are some of the connections that you've made in your own life? Like, wow, I didn't know that, and now I do. That there was some work. Can you share? What is anybody willing to share any of that with us?
I can go.
Thank you,
So I think that one of the things that I like had to unlearn was that in hetero sex, that sex doesn't always end with like a male orgasm,
Mia.
which is something that you see not only in porn but in romantic comedies and here in romance novels, right? It's like very centered on male pleasure, and it's very centered on orgasm. And even in non-hetero sex, right? Orgasms don't always happen, and that's okay, right? And so like this idea that there's like a goalpost at the end of
Mhm.
sex, like you got to like keep running towards that goalpost, and then you hit the
Yeah.
goalpost and like everything's done. Like
Yeah.
not all sex has orgasms. Sometimes sex stops and starts. Oftentimes, people with vaginas need different kinds of stimulation other than penetration or other than sex. So, like, there's all those things that I was like, oh, like, these are good things that we should share with people that, like, this isn't like, there isn't one roadmap for how sex works for folks. It can look a variety of different ways, and all of those can be good and normal and pleasurable and fun, right? And so that was one thing that took me a while to unlearn.
Yeah, that's good, Mia. That's really good. Anyone else?
I mean, yeah,
It's a big question, I know.
just to piggyback off what Mia said, that was beautiful. Yeah, just thinking of sex um, as the way people play. I think framing things in terms of play and pleasure. I think for so long, sex it did have kind of maybe was more of like a status thing, if that makes sense at all to me. That sex was something that you had not necessarily for your spiritual well-being or to have fun with people in your life, but it was to confer status on me. That number of people I have sex with, the way my body looks, the way people see my partner, whatever it is, or to confine one partner to only have sex with me. It was and I find myself still kind of holding tight to a lot of those messages, but being understanding that, much like in the film, that it's like learning a new language in many ways, but to see sex as just pleasurable human interactions of all kinds, just kind of trying to expand that definition, is something that I think has been very good for me and the health of my sex life.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful.
I'll just
Go
add
ahead.
really quick. Oh, I'm sorry.
Please, Lynetta, and then Kanoe. Yeah.
Okay, I'll be super quick. At the end of my first marriage, and went back into dating, I realized I didn't know how to talk about sex or that I wanted it. It was just like we look, like but like the whole the whole idea of like sexting, I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to say like I desire this or I want this. So that was a whole, like I had to take a class. A friend basically gave me a couple prompts and a couple scripts, but I honestly did not know how to do that. And
Yeah.
it's still learning how to have that sensual language about what you desire.
Yeah. That's really good, Lynetta.
I
That's
need
really
those prompts.
Mia said, make a workbook for all of
I
us.
know.
We can all use a workbook.
You guys share.
Yeah, Kanoe, please go ahead.
I was just, off of all of that, I didn't mean to cut off Lynetta at the beginning.
No, it's okay.
But,
It's the virtual world.
yeah, something that really speaks to me in both of those spaces that I just like really connected with was this idea of how expansive sex could be. I grew up in like a lot of people did, with a very like heteronormative understanding of like what sex is, and heterosexual sex in movies doesn't didn't look pretty to me for some reason. Like I was like, oh, that doesn't look alluring. That doesn't look exciting. It looks like you're breaking things because just the passion is taking over, or it looks messy or scary for the cis woman, you know, like all of those spaces where I tried to fit myself in to understand. It felt like there wasn't space because it didn't look pretty to me. But then in my coming out journey and realizing that I was also queer, I was like, oh, because this wasn't made for queer folks, like, and that sex could be pretty. A really good example of that is The Handmaiden. I think it's a really good film that centers a queer love story in a very beautiful but very raw and human way that wasn't part of my media literacy and my upbringing. So I think that was something that I didn't know before that I know now, is that sex can be pretty, in addition to being all of what it all is. So
yeah, that's good. That's really good. Thank you, Kanoe. Tristan, would you like to leave us with a jewel?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I've learned is that is around consent, right? Like the continuous enthusiastic yes, because I was taught that, right, like sex is a game, right, and that if you got the right game, then you can make this thing happen, right? And so, you know, I think I had to sit and reconcile with the amount of harm that I had caused through coercion, because of this mislearning around consent. And then the other one is learning how to listen without ego. And in sexual negotiation, and understanding that the rejection of a particular or the lack of desire in a particular act or a particular, you know, sex at a particular time is not a rejection of me in the relationship. And then the importance of post-coital activities and rituals. You know, and that like sex, like the active sex itself is such a small part, and all the stuff that leads up and all the stuff that comes afterwards is so much more important than the act of it.
Yeah. Well, Tristan, I don't know I'm gonna say more than, but I am gonna say on par with. For sure. No, but I'm gonna say on par with, because you make a valid point, right? And that has a particular signature and a mark depending on who you are and who your lover is and how you all get to move into that space. So, well, I want to thank all of you for being present with us in these candid conversations for cultures and communities that falls under the Milwaukee Film Festival happening now. So any of you watching us live currently, you are more than welcome to log in and watch all of the films that are present. You all have been phenomenal. The panel, thank you all for sharing in yourself. Thank you for having sensual moments with all of us together. Well, ain't that something? Look what we did here. Now, we didn't ask for consent, Tristan. I don't know what that's gonna mean. I don't know. But maybe we did ask for consent by being present in this way. Alex, I'd like to take a moment to thank you for putting yourself literally all the way out there, okay? Because let's be clear, there are things that you shared about yourself, your family, your life, your interiority that not too many people would do. And so I commend you highly.
Thanks for watching. Thank you, everyone here. I learn so much more every conversation I have. So please keep the conversation coming, because it's always a great experience.
Again, I hope we all get to see each other soon. Hope everybody is having a wonderful and a sensual life, and enjoy the rest of what this week has for you. You all are divine. We'll chat soon. Peace.